This video is sponsored by Ground News. This video contains opinions, hot takes, criticisms of the writing of Avatar: The Last Airbender, and an irreverence for nostalgia. You have been warned. I look forward to the comments. Korra fans, I come in peace. Look at the shirt. I have Korrasami art. This is not an attack. This is a conversation. Ignore those two. Don't look at them. So the new Avatar: The Last Airbender spin-off series has been announced and greenlit by Nickelodeon. It has a 26 episode order and will be titled Avatar: Seven Havens. Set in a world shattered by a devastating cataclysm, a young earthbender discovers she is the new Avatar after Korra. But in this dangerous era, that shadow marks her as humanity's destroyer, not its savior. Hunted by both human and spirit enemies, she and her long-lost twin must uncover their mysterious origins and save the Seven Havens before civilization's last strongholds collapse. We're going dystopia this time. Now, people very quickly latched on to the implications that Korra has done something to fundamentally change the Avatar from a savior to a destroyer. So now, once again, people are arguing who is the better Avatar, Korra?
I'm the Avatar! You gotta deal with it!
Or Aang?
Looking for me?
You're the Airbender?
And that fucking conversation is boring. However, as someone who needed to make a slightly shorter video between a much more academically dense video, I felt like throwing my sense into the bucket.
Let's say to the price of 1 copper piece.
I think that conversation, Aang versus Korra, is a bad place to start any dialogue about those characters because fundamentally Korra and Aang might as well exist in two totally different universes in terms of their conflict and how it fits their characters. What allowed Aang to overall succeed as a character and Korra to is not them as individual characters, but their shows as a whole. Avatar: The Last Airbender benefited from not only being the first, but to have one overall goal and mission for the characters.
Sozin's comet will return by the end of this summer, and Fire Lord Ozai will use its power to finish the war once and for all.
It was epic, yet very simple, and allowed for natural character development, no matter how small.
There's no way a bunch of girls took us down. I would be honored if you would teach me.
Even if I'm a girl?
The Legend of Korra has multiple external and internal issues when it came to making its story work over multiple seasons, including the uncertainty of how many seasons it was even going to get. Let's discuss. What are the actual problems with The Legend of Korra, and how do they tie to Avatar: The Last Airbender?
I'm sick of your far-fetched tales. 3 typhoons?
Avatar: The Last Airbender is often, rightfully so, regarded as one of the best animated series of all time. It was the brainchild of Michael Dante DiMartino and Brian Kazinko. It aired on Nickelodeon from February 21st, 2005 to July 19th, 2008. For me, that would have been my last year of middle school up to my junior year of high school. So I was 12 when it started and 16 when it ended. I went from Aang to Zuko. The series pulled from a lot of non-Western mythology and religion and faith in a way that audiences hadn't really seen in a Western animated series. Because Avatar: The Last Airbender is not an anime, and people will kill you if you say it is. In this Avatar world, there are people who can manipulate the elements of earth, water, fire, and air in a technique known as bending.
We ride the wind, we feel the fire.
One person, the Avatar, has the ability to bend all the elements, and their job is to sustain peace among the human world and the spirit world, which do intersect in a number of ways throughout both series. 100 years before the main story, the leader of the Fire Nation, Sozin, decided to use the power of a comet to take over the world. He killed the previous Avatar, Roku, and then used the comet to commit genocide on the Air Nomads, one of the other nations of this world. Aang managed to survive because because before this happened, he refused the call to action, ended up trapped in ice, and is later found by Katara and Sokka of the Southern Water Tribe 100 years afterwards.
But I believe Aang can save the world.
One of the antagonists for the first season and later a deuterologist is Zuko, the banished prince of the Fire Nation, who...
My father says she was born lucky. He says I was lucky to be born. That's rough, buddy.
He goes through a character journey, one of the most notable. If you know anything about this show, you probably know he has a great character arc. The series lasts for 3 seasons, 61 episodes, and is still, as I said, very beloved. For many people my age and younger, this was must-watch television. It had a broad audience, and I'm guessing for many, it was their first introduction to these themes, especially because at this time, anime was still very, kind of ghettoized. Unless it was Akira, Perfect Blue, or the Studio Ghibli films, people largely did not see anime as an art form worth watching because it reused so much animation, the fan service, how long it was. People used to think that watching 291 episodes of Dragon Ball Z was too much to watch. And Avatar landed right as Naruto, One Piece, and Fruits Basket, because don't let history erase that Fruit Basket was at one point the best-selling manga series out there, really grew into mainstream popularity. And I really want to emphasize mainstream because it is very easily to be like, it was always kind of popular. It was always kind of popular. Nowhere near what it is now. Because of that, the pedestal it was on was so high that The Legend of Korra was always going to have a much harder time being accepted by that same audience. The Legend of Korra first started airing on Nickelodeon from April 14th, 2012 to July 25th, 2014. And then it moved to Nick.com from August 1st to December 19th of 2014. Remember that change, it will become important later. I was then freshly 20 and then 22 when the series ended. So I went from being roughly the age of the characters in Aang's show to being roughly the ages of the characters on Korra's show, which is kind of a fun way of experiencing it. And this new series was 70 years after the events of Aang's series. And Korra, this young woman from the Northern Water Tribe, is now the Avatar. She goes to Republic City to train with Tenzin, Aang's son, to learn airbending, the only element she hasn't mastered because she has a spiritual blockage.
Ever since you were a little girl, you've excelled at the physical side of bending, but completely ignored the spiritual side. The Avatar must master both.
Republic City is essentially stolen Earth Kingdom land that was occupied by the Fire Nation and was made independent in a comic book series called The Promise that makes Katara okay with settler colonialism, but yet my ship is, John Smith and Pocahontas. Anyway. We're not going to talk about that right now. The writers have described Republic City as if Manhattan had happened in Asia, or Shanghai meets Manhattan, which is Asia has cities, but go off. So Korra moves to Republic City and ends up meeting everyone she'll ever date there. Asami Sato, so beautiful you forget she has no depth. Mako, boring and should have been gay. Bolin, boring and painfully straight. Her other adult mentor character type is Toph's daughter Lynn, probably one of the better written characters on the show, but again, not that deep. And there are a lot of supporting characters, and every book the villain changes to deal with a different political or spiritual aspect of the world that we haven't seen before. From the very beginning, I think it was a bit jarring that they picked a time period so close to Aang's, and felt especially at the moment there was no room for Korra to not be compared to Aang.
How do you think Avatar Aang would have handled this?
His kids are there. Toph's kids are there. Toph's daughter and Aang's son dated, like Tang 2.0.
With so much on the line, it would be nice if we could help each other out, at least for one night.
Like old times?
Like old times.
That's weird.
Zuko comes back and he rides a dragon. There's Iroh too, the Iroh that flies. And we get a disappointing Katara cameo once a season. And there's so much of Aang's legacy at the forefront that you never really get a chance to experience Korra without him. Then Korra is also a very different character. The setting is different. Their stupid bending sport is very dumb. Everything is modernized and westernized in a way that historically makes kind of sense, but still feels off-putting as an extension of this already existing popular series. Saying all that, it still had like a shortened episode list. It was 12 episodes compared to 22 from the previous series, but it lasted for 4 seasons, and unlike After Their Last Airbender, from the start it was unclear when the series was going to end. So rather than having one long arc that allows Korra to have a very clear narrative, we have a very choppy political story with romances that overall feel very underwritten teen characters, and like much more compelling adult characters, and an Avatar that was just always going to be divisive because she was a girl. Yeah, gender does play a role here, sorry to say.
Let's go. Let's go.
To understand the messy issues surrounding The Legend of Korra, you need to understand that the network was really yanking their chain a bit. Breik, which is the portmanteau for the creators, I will use it because it's just shorter to say that, have often said that book 1 was meant to be a whole series of television, which is why it wrapped up so quickly and a little too neatly. And each season they were not sure if the series was going to continue, and you can't write a long-standing 4-season story without knowing if you're going to get those seasons. And while I do think that books 1 or 2 are
very bad. Very, very bad.
A lot of that is because it feels really rushed in terms of fitting a lot into a very small part of time. Yes, the first part of the Avatar: Last Airbender series is a little bit slower paced, but that's world building that we need to allow the rest of the story to smoothly come together. And Korra doesn't have that. Books 3 and 4 feel like one story, and I think that's why overall they are better and have overall better-ish antagonists. And I may not think that the writers are great at romance because, you know, brainworms, but I also don't think they would have made the choice to have Korra and Mako date and then break up and then Mako get back with Asami, and then eventually Asami and Korra would be endgame if they planned it out that way. Like, I think that this is not, from the creators of Kadang, I don't think that that was like their vision.
Baby, you're my forever girl.
Another thing that's not meant to sound insulting, but I think needs to be clear, is that while Breik did create both The Last Airbender and Legend of Korra, there were different writing teams for both. Like, they were the showrunners for The Last Airbender, but Aaron Hertz was the head writer, and there were just also episodes written by so many different people. Like, that original series was really a collaboration in that regard. Korra's first season was entirely written by Breik. Brian and I decided to write the first season ourselves, kind of like a big movie. We'd written a couple quick spec scripts between the time of the first series and then Korra. We kind of had evolved as writers, I guess, and thought that it would be definitely another new challenge for us to really lay out a whole new story ourselves and tell the story exactly how it was coming out of our heads. So that was a really fun challenge, I think. In the second season, 2 of the original writers from the first series came back, Tim Hendrick and Joshua Hamilton, who would co-write that season with Breik. And finally, in seasons 3 and 4, you got Katie Matilla back, a female writer and the only female writer on Korra. Views-wise, this was a really big issue because the audience drop-off from book 1 to book 2 was significant. When the series premiered, it was to 4.5 million views, and it ended with 3.68, and book 2 opened with 2.60 and ended with 2.09. And as someone who was there, it was very hard for me to work up to keep up with book 2. Book 1 was messy towards the end, but the speculation, the online activity of this new series was very high in the boards, and so we kept going. But the ending was so bad that I think only like the really diehards came back and stayed, even when it was hard. Even the 2-parter episode Beginnings, which tells the story of the first Avatar, was and still is kind of like the standout of the series, even though I know there are people who have some issues with like the religious aspects of that story. But that episode still had really horrible views because people were just not watching the show anymore. And then book 3 opened with a viewership of 1.5, and then after 8 episodes it was moved from Nickelodeon to Nick.com, which on a certain level is probably the best thing that happened to the show because it allowed us to really have bisexuals, but it was very jarring, and if it wasn't for the message boards, I would not have known that it had moved there. It would have just seemed canceled, so it wasn't translated very well. It did feel like they had lost sort of like their enthusiasm for the series. Book 3 is both the best season of the show, but also very hard to watch because Korra is tortured and brutally humbled as a character. The season ends with her in a wheelchair, suffering from PTSD, and it is hard, and it transfers into 4. And in book 4, the budget was cut, and so while it was still 13 episodes, they made a clip show episode in order to fluff it out. And Bright kept said that the network wanted more action, more fighting, that they doubted Korra's ability to sell because she was a female lead. And I think the studio just had very high expectations for Legend of Korra that it frankly did not meet. And while there is definitely a studio element to it, like not knowing how long they were going to have, I think the truth also is that the first season of Korra is bad. The political story it wants to tell is not good. I think it's very frustrating to watch. I think it is kind of exhausting at the end. It's hard to rewatch actually knowing everything, which is like one of the big hurdles it is for me, because I really liked Amon when it was first airing. I found him to be a very compelling villain, visually like very haunting. But once you know everything about his storyline, it just kind of feels kind of like,
you're basic.
Interesting concept, flawed execution, and it just makes it hard to come back, especially because it seems like, as we will get into, a lot of how they developed Korra was making her like a foil to Aang, and then also creating a villain who would then meet her personality. And that is good in the first season to a degree, like her loving bending versus Amon one taking away bending. But, you know, that's not gonna really do anything when you have Ulamog and like the Red Lotus and then Kuvera in the end. And so you have this messy soup of like, there are these interesting politics that Korra wants to discuss, but it doesn't really know how to do that. And that is a flaw in being able to write political commentary. Is something that is kind of there in Avatar: The Last Airbender, but is largely under discussed because it is successful at telling the contained political story, even if the nuances aren't always there.
What I'm about to show you, I discovered in that wretched Fire Nation prison.
The biggest thing that Aang benefits from as the Avatar and as a hero is that his narrative is very simple. It's almost the hero's journey to a T. Like, his villain in the grand scheme of things is this one-note, abusive father who is willing to kill his own father and son for power. The Fire Nation is this genocidal force that is easy to hate as a collective, overall, faceless, fascist society. And while we do spend time in the Fire Nation, largely in Book 3, Fire, seeing how the Fire Nation teaches propaganda to its people, it does feel incomplete because what we rarely see are Fire Nation citizens who are protesting, resisting, or doing anything to fight back against the Fire Nation. With the exception of Zuko and Iroh, who are like main characters, the only characters we see who do push back against the Fire Nation are the Fire Nation priest, Zhang and Che in Book 1, and then Piandao in Book 3, and that's it. This is something that has bothered me more as an adult and teenager than it did when I was like obviously a child watching it, because I'm just like, you know, we are literally watching a genocide unfold right now. And when I was rewatching it, I was reminding myself that this is a story for children. It wants to be very clear in its narrative. To a degree, the good characters, especially Aang, have to be morally right in a way that is age appropriate and narratively appropriate. And I appreciate that because I'm someone who defends Steven Universe a lot, because I think that if you thought that Steven Universe was gonna like end its conflict with like Steven shattering the diamonds, you weren't watching the show. Like, I'm a big defender of that series and its choices because I think people watch it a lot in bad faith. At the same time, rewatching Jet and the Puppet Master, especially now in this political climate, it's kind of hard, you know? Like, in Jet, we meet that titular character Jet, who is like Katara's first kiss off screen, and he is someone who's part of this group of rebels in the forest of the Earth Kingdom fighting the Fire Nation. He and everyone else in this group is displaced and an orphan and has lost people or family to the Fire Nation.
Long shot over there, his town got burned down by the Fire Nation. And we found the Duke trying to steal our food. I don't think he ever really had a home.
What about you?
Fire Nation killed my parents.
Jet wants to fill the reserve and blow up this dam to flood the village below, which is Earth Kingdom but occupied by the Fire Nation. This is obviously morally wrong, and it is also so over the top in how it's constructed because A, there are plenty of ways it could get Earth Kingdom citizens to leave unharmed, and B, it is done to delegitimize this kind of brutal resistance. This is not only done with this scenario, but also by having Jet and his team abuse an older Fire Nation citizen who Sokka defends as like a helpless old man.
Jet, he's just an old man! He's Fire Nation, search him! But he's not hurting anyone!
And what is frustrating about this moment is that there is actually a gray area of the situation that could be discussed, which is the fact that this man is a Fire Nation citizen in occupied Earth Kingdom land during a war of cultural and ethnic genocide. So he's not innocent. He's actively in this nation as part of like a colonial conquest. The thing is that the show also wants to highlight this idea that not every Fire Nation citizen is to blame for the actions of their nation. And that is true, but they do benefit from it. And the thing about it too is like we don't see any uprising, we don't see any resistance, any underground societies of like Fire Nation citizens in the Earth Kingdom trying to help. As far as we know, the Fire Nation citizens believe that the other nations are dog shit. They believe that they're animals who deserve to be taken over. We have no reason to believe otherwise because we have not been shown that.
What'd you say, colony trash?
We haven't been shown it in any significant way, and so it makes it really hard to watch how they treat the individual Fire Nation citizens as if they are just sort of like living their lives in the colonial project. And even though this is a controversial opinion, I feel that way about Hama and the Puppet Master as well. Like, yes, her actions are wrong, but the show never takes the time to ask why she should not hold every Fire Nation citizen responsible. They benefit from her imprisonment. Her presence as a moral foil to Katara is, in my opinion, ridiculous because Katara wasn't in a cage watching the people around her die. She wasn't being physically and probably sexually tortured. Like, Hama is a direct victim of an attempted cultural genocide, and she's treated like the bad guy.
Any sign of trouble was met with cruel retribution. And yet each month I felt the full moon enriching me with its energy. There had to be something I could do to escape.
Sokka and Katara lost their mother in a raid, and that's horrible. Their father left to fight the war. They do have trauma, absolutely. And it's also different from the Earth Kingdom's general experience of constant warfare of the last 100 years outside of like the big cities like Ba Sing Se. That's different from being captured and being made to waste away until you die with people you've known from childhood. Like, what Hama and Jet go through is very different from Katara and Aang and Sokka. All that being said, I think that you watch these episodes, you can discourse about it and you can argue about it if you disagree with me or not. This is a very clear good conquering, very clear evil story. None of these issues that I may have because I'm more radical need to be held up as like red flag issues for the series. You know, even when it comes to Zuko, him becoming Fire Lord is not actually about the morality of monarchy. It's about his self-actualization, leading him to a path to reclaim his honor and moving away from the morals of his father. It just also happens that he is inheriting the throne of a nation that did 100 years war with like 1 2/3 a genocide attempt, you know? And again, if it was self-contained, that's fine. But then it escalates with the Promise and then the Legend of Korra. I've spoken about the Promise before, you can look at this video. But essentially an issue arises where mixed race Fire Nation Earth Kingdom citizens don't want to leave their occupied territory, and it causes a lot of tension between Aang and Zuko. But Katara is oddly okay with the settler colonialism because her children with Aang would be mixed race, which is weird to think about at 15, but whatever. In the end, those places end up being the roots of what will become Republic City, and it has a statue of Zuko in it, which is like, I love you, dog, but like, you don't need that. I hate the Promise. I hate everything about it. I hate how Katara is written. I hate how Zuko and Aang are written. The fact that it wants to frame this blended society of Fire Nation and Earth Kingdom people that we've never seen before, whinging about their imaginary dual citizenship when the previous Fire Lord tried to burn down the entire Earth Kingdom. It's like, what did you guys do about it? It's fucking stupid, and I hate it, and it just really feels like it doesn't want to deal with like the actual intensity of what the Fire Nation did.
From our airships we will rain fire over their lands, a fire that will destroy everything. And out of the ashes, a new world will be born, A world in which all the lands are Fire Nation, and I am the supreme ruler of everything.
So Korra's enemies are meant to discuss things like class, spirituality, etc. But those are more complicated issues than just like getting rid of genocidal tyrant guy. And these ideas are flattened because they're only voiced through characters who are the enemy. We get no centrist ideas. Korra is the Avatar. The Avatar is a genuine force for good, ergo she can't really be wrong. So even if someone brings up an interesting or compelling world issue, it cannot be legitimate.
What did Amon want? Equality for all. Unalak, he brought back the spirits. And Zahir believed in freedom.
I guess.
The problem was those guys were totally out of balance, and they took their ideologies too far.
Amon is the leader of the Equalists in Book 1, and he basically says that there is a bias against non-benders, that benders are responsible for issues in the world, and that the benders are an elite society, or like an elitist group that looks down on like the lower class non-benders.
The only thing bending has brought to the world is suffering. It has been the cause of every war in every era.
Like, clearly this is an extreme position, like getting rid of all bending, which is what he wants to do, but it raised really compelling issues. And again, just to pull from myself and what I was feeling like while this was airing, and to kind of put it in like a context. I was 20 when this came out, in college, and Trayvon Martin was murdered in 2012. The same year the show came out, and it was a very big political turning point for me. I went to a PWI, and it really radicalized me, especially because my brother is only 1 month younger than Trayvon Martin. And I remember that this was the beginning of these conversations for me about equality and race and history in a bigger way than I ever had before, because I was just really in it. And my minor in college was history, so I was in an American history class writing papers about the connection between Trayvon Martin and the race riots of the Red Summer in 1919 leading into the 1920s. And Korra is political even in the sense that it's inspired by the 1920s because of those turmoils, as the writers say. Here we knew you're going to be set in one really big city, and in that certain time period, that kind of 1920s inspired time period makes me think of revolutions, class warfare, strikes, class upheaval, stuff like that. These huge moments in history that I'm learning about in a critical way. And then my favorite show spinoff is going to be covering it. It's like, this is huge. This is really interesting. But it's also why I found it so disappointing, because I was so in it at the moment. And the thing that was always so weird to me, and it's weird every time I rewatch it, is that it never actually shows the non-bending discrimination in a serious way, which is frustrating, because if you're watching it and you see that there are like bender mobs and jobs that require like lightning bending, then like, yeah, clearly there's an inequality issue here. It's a cool concept. It makes sense worldbuilding wise. Even metatextually, like, how many people joke about like that Sokka's like basically useless to the gang?
We can take them 3 on 3.
Actually, Toph, there's 4 of us.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't count you. You know, no bending and all.
I can still fight!
Like, it's interesting, but they never do anything with it.
Benders like this girl only use their power to oppress us!
What? I'm not oppressing anyone. You're oppressing yourself!
There's no commitment to it, because Korra is a bender, and what would it say if you make your hero an oppressing force? So they don't deal with it, and the twist is that Amon is secretly a bender who has water bending daddy issues, and it's very much like, did you know Marx was a business owner? You don't like capitalism and yet you participate in capitalism? That's really interesting. I hate it so much. They brought up this really cool issue that would have added nuance and layers to this series and make it work for a slightly more adult audience that did grow up with the original. And nope. And this would continue, like really interesting big concepts about politics, something that required more than just violence to solve. And the only time they really let like that kind of development happen was with Kuvira, the fascist. The writers, when you see them in interviews and hear them, they know there's a gray area to be seen. I think a big part of our creative point of view is to explore the gray areas in everything, especially with our villains. We try to look at all of our characters as people first, then as heroes or villains second, or perhaps more accurately, protagonists and antagonists. If a character is simply evil and aware of it, then that's really static for me. It's far more dynamic and realistic if that character believes they are on the right side. One of the things that resonated with me so deeply about Princess Mononoke was how there weren't any villains, but rather people with competing interests. That wasn't a perspective I was seeing in Western animation at that time, but that struck a chord with me and the kinds of stories I wanted to tell. This quote is good and frustrating because, like, Amon is not Lady Eboshi. Like, Lady Eboshi, I'm so sorry, Queen, that you even brought you in this conversation. Korra, due to being the avatar in this situation, in this comparison, is not Ashitaka. She's the forest spirit, Nightwalker. Like, her purpose in the narrative is a living god who is good. Like, I think that the issue is that, like, that's not how the Avatar world is framed. It's not how Korra is framed. That's not how we have been told to see the Avatar. We have not had any situation yet in the show, I don't know about all other comic stuff, where like the Avatar is like a complex good. Like that's definitely not Aang, and I don't think that's Korra. And so I think like that's a cool inspiration, but like that's not what's on the screen. And while the word of God has confirmed that Amon did believe all the things he said, it's still very sus to have like your class revolutionary style character be a hypocrite who dies at the end with no solution to the issue he brought up really being important to the narrative going forward. Because like, yeah, they get like one human non-bending person on their council, but like that's a small part of a much bigger problem that never gets addressed. This is part of the issue of making villains rooted in political ideology that's progressive, making them cross the line and then never dealing with it again. Like, is there a bending elite system? Maybe, but like we're not going to talk about it. And it makes it hard to rewatch Korra more so than Avatar, because at least with Avatar they do have these longer seasons. And I think with a critical lens, like the issue that comes up for me with Korra more so is just kind of how like it feels different. It feels very Western. As a young adult watching Korra, I was just very much more aware of the racial dynamics of the series. Now I want to discuss Korra gender and how that plays a role in how she's perceived, but I just want to like say this thing and just put it out there because I think it's often underexplored and under-discussed how few Asian people were actually involved in the writing of this series. How white most of the voice talent is. Like in my research, I found only one Asian writer who was listed for any of the episodes in the series, and that was Mei Chan, who was a staff writer for a lot of the episodes in Book 3, Fire, in Avatar: The Last Airbender. And when I was rewatching The Last Airbender for this, I was like, wow, except for like the two Asian characters of Zuko and Iroh, every single other person in this main cast is voiced by a white person. And in Korra, of the main crew, there are 0 Asian actors. Like Asami's voice actress is part Mexican, but that's it. And it's not something I noticed when I was watching the original series, obviously, but like when I was watching Korra actively, I was very aware there was a white woman voicing that character. It was just odd. And I think even Janet Varney, who voiced Korra, has said she probably wouldn't do it now. And I was to say that they did a bad job. I just think that in the time between 2008 and 2014, it was just a different time and people were really becoming aware of this. Even the fact that like adult Aang, his design was inspired by like Brian, I was just like, who's that white guy?
Aang. Whose goddamn white baby is that?
Part of why I enjoyed Avatar: The Last Airbender is part of why I honestly enjoyed anime and kung fu movies and a lot of like non-Western media is because it was media that featured non-white people. Like I grew up watching like Chow Yun-fat movies, Jet Li movies, really badly dubbed with my mom. And part of why we liked it, especially as a Black person, was because it was fun seeing non-white heroic characters in action films. The same thing with Avatar. Like I liked how it was similar to anime but not. And I think as I got older and I wanted to like enjoy this thing in like a not just being full otaku about it, I just felt more aware about it. And I point out this thing especially with Korra because I think part of what makes Korra so important to many is that visually she's a queer indigenous character woman who's allowed to be multifaceted, and that is still true visually. I just think it's important to acknowledge that women of color were not behind the helm of writing her. As someone who's literally been in this community of Avatar since I was like 14 years old, I think it's simply important to acknowledge that the fandom is not always a safe space for people of color or anyone who is critical of the fact that this show borrows lovingly from Asian culture. But it doesn't have that many Asian people who work on the show directly in the writer's room. And to this point, I can hear people say, like, why does this matter? Voice actors should be able to voice whomever. It's voice acting. And the problem is that it's not just voice acting. While there's definitely been more diversity in the market and in the job pool, it is still skewing very white, and that's a problem. That's why there are still organizations that will discuss how to get into these certain roles. And I think people view this conversation in bad faith by bringing up the fact that that there are female voice actors that voice guy characters, or that there are a handful of black voice actors who have voiced non-black characters. No one is saying that in an industry where there is an element of versatility in voice acting, that there cannot be room for mixing things up. However, the unevenness of who gets the opportunity to be in the room is an issue. And when you have a series that is entirely based upon Asian culture and Inuit culture, the fact that there are so few people representing that in the voice acting team is a massive oversight. For it to be in that first series primarily Iroh, Zuko, and then to a certain degree Suki, who I would consider a supporting character, that's not good. That doesn't make any sense. And for someone who might say, what about Samurai Jack? Because Samurai Jack is voiced by a black man. That is one example. And Samurai Jack is also a much less successful franchise in the sense that, yes, it's a very well-loved show, but it definitely isn't doing Avatar numbers. And also, if we want to be frank about it, there are a lot of overlapping issues because of who's behind the scenes. However, if they were to make a live-action Samurai Jack movie, I think everyone would understand that Samurai Jack should be Japanese. Whereas with Avatar: The Last Airbender, the ambiguity of the voice actors, plus the way that people kind of treat the Pan-Asian influence as kind of like a dressing gown but not cultural, allows things like the Last Airbender movie to be made in the first place. I remember fans saying that, not all of them, but a big chunk of them saying that it didn't really matter if white people were playing Sokka and Katara, because Sokka and Katara were not based off real people. There isn't a real water tribe.
Groundbreaking.
Yeah, we know there isn't a real water tribe, but we also know who it's based on. We cannot have a series where they have entire, articles and extra DVD specials about the inspiration of these products and then say, yeah, but that doesn't really matter. You can't have it both ways. You cannot say that Avatar was this really groundbreaking story in huge part because of its Pan-Asian themes, and then say that the Pan-Asians behind the scenes wouldn't matter. That doesn't make any sense. Having that would make the show belong less to Bryke, but the antagonism and insistence that only Americans care this much about race is so fucking exhausting to see when I go into these Reddit threads and have people just make all these weird comments. I'm like, the show is made by Americans. America, that had the Chinese Exclusion Act, Japanese internment camps, the Korean and Vietnam Wars. The idea that there's no racialized aspect to this when something is made in America. I'm so sorry, Europeans that make these comments, but yes, race is important in America. And also you guys helped. So you really can't poo-poo it just because it's inconvenient or annoying to you. And it's also frustrating because this is not a purely white versus non-white thing. Just like last year, there were some Scottish readers who were critical of the Iron Flame or whatever that book series is called for having Scottish Gaelic names that the author didn't know how to pronounce. And we have seen online more Welsh, Scottish, and Irish people have been critical about the way that Gaelic and Gallic and Celtic ideas and names are just copied and pasted from like Wikipedia to like generic fantasy novels without any understanding of those cultures, those histories, besides building off of Tolkien's influence of using those words and languages in his own work as kind of like a blueprint of fantasy, but like just taking these cultures and not knowing anything about what these relevants are. I love anime, obviously. And if I made something that was pulling from Asian culture and had a television show, I would want Asian writers in that room with me, more than one. Like, you know, even if I were to make a series that took place in like a fictional African society, I would want African writers in that room because I'm not African. I've never been to Africa. Just because I have ancestral ties to parts of Africa, it does not mean that I just automatically know things about it because I'm Black. That's not how things work. Like, you have to actually look things up. You know, Avatar is a great franchise. I love it. I support it. I respect it. I think Break seem like cool creators. But they are still white men who picked the name Korra after a dog. You're able to be critical of it without it having to be an indictment of it, without everyone trying to like be like, oh, you're saying that Mae Whitman can't be. This is not an anti-Mae Whitman thing. Like, do you not see the Owl House stuff? Like, it's frustrating to me as someone who has been in this community for so long, who has seen the antagonism, to have people act like, like, you know, like, calm down. All right, so that's the race wank, so we should probably get to the gender wank.
Yes! Finally!
Break have talked about their choice to make Korra a girl, and that it was rooted in wanting to do something different from The Last Airbender, and that their cast of characters was made up of strong female characters already, so it seemed like a natural progression. We love the old characters, Aang and his crew. We thought, okay, what's it gonna be about? We love the old characters, Aang and his crew, but we felt like we had told their story already, and we had spent a lot of time on that. So the thing that kicked off was, let's do it about the next avatar after Aang. We've shown throughout the old stories that there were plenty of avatars that were women, so we thought, hey, that would be fun if we just wanted to do something different. If we're going to revisit this world and spend a lot of time and hard work making these stories, it's going to be fresh, new for us. And we love having strong female characters. It's something I think we're noted for. Yeah, some of the most popular characters on the old series are Katara and Toph and Azula. We thought, hey, why not make the main character an awesome female hero? And it's been cool to see everyone kind of embrace her. She's the next avatar. Yeah, it wasn't a huge deal to us, but there was definitely a bit of trepidation, you know, the way people have an idea in their head. Statistically, the data says a female lead in action, the story won't work. Well, I don't know. We just figured that'll be fine. And you see all these other movies and books and projects coming out right now that are really big, that have female leads, and it's part of the movement. Girl power.
Girl power. Equalization between the sexes.
Often when people talk about the criticisms of Korra as a character, and by extension the show, how much her gender plays into that criticism is brought up. For those who are fans, they will say that Korra being an abrasive woman, and visibly a woman of color, is why she's treated so antagonistically.
Ridiculous.
Admit it. You like me.
No, I'm with Asami.
Yeah, but when you're with her, you're thinking about me, aren't you?
Get over yourself.
And anti-Korra fans will say, that's not true. We like Katara and Toph. I think the reality is a little bit in between. Like, having just rewatched Avatar: The Last Airbender, I think when we address the female representation issue, I think that yes, Avatar: The Last Airbender overall has better characters, especially female characters, than Korra. I think that Katara and Toph are good characters. Please hear that, okay? They are, however, mostly static after their first and often minor character arc. For example, when Katara starts off the series, she wants to be a waterbender. She struggles to learn at first, gets better, tackles sexism in the Northern Water Tribe, and within the weeks she is there, she becomes a master waterbender. That's pretty much the biggest arching character journey she goes through, and it's over in the first season.
Katara, you've advanced more quickly than any student I've ever trained. You have proven that with fierce determination, passion, and hard work, you can accomplish anything. Raw talent alone is not enough.
And yes, there are episodes that show her being challenged by darker impulses, usually with, you know, a certain male character, but Katara is pretty static in terms of development after book 1. Her roles as the heart of the team and as Aang's love interest take up a lot more of her character role than we remember, because Katara is competent. And I think this is really important to understand. Like, back in these mid-2000s, we had years of popular shonen anime. After The Last Airbender, Naruto, and Bleach were all airing around the same time, and we saw female leads either be damsel in distress, sidelined, or trophies. Katara is a powerful waterbender, one of the best healers, and a good person, and she feels overall pretty developed. And I think overall she is, but she just doesn't have much to like do after this, which is not to say that Katara is badly written. Actually, that's not what I'm thinking. It is to say that the characters that go through dynamic, long-lasting, series-long character journeys are Aang and Zuko. Even Sokka's sexism arc only lasts like 5 episodes. Toph, Azula, Mai, Ty Lee are all competent and interesting on paper, but they don't grow and they don't really change. Mai only exists for Zuko's benefit. Ty Lee is part of, you know, Azula's toxic Yuri formation. Azula only has a little bit of interiority so she can have a breakdown in the finale. Katara also doesn't really challenge Aang. She is almost endlessly supportive of him. She is his love interest, is traditionally attractive, feminine, and in the end chooses to be with Aang. She is the ideal female character in a series like this, especially because she does not challenge male audiences watching book 1, is that she's almost always like, Aang, 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 Aang's the best. And I'm just like, girl, I get it. Like, that's your man, your man, your man.
Aang is the bravest person I know. He has done nothing but help people and save lives since I met him. It's not his fault he disappeared, right, Aang?
She's very much the perfect female character in that sense for a still male-centered television show. But that also is what's significant, is because Korra does challenge those things. From being muscular yet busty, you know, bratty, brash, egotistical, you know, homie hopping, dating around, and like the lack of typical feminine respectability. Like, Korra challenges all those things. Like, even if you compare it to Toph is 12. Like, she's certified an OP badass, has a crush on Sokka, and is rich. Like, yeah, she's abrasive, but she's also relatively a supporting character. Like, her crush is meant to soften her, and when we do have moments of sensitivity for her, it's very few and far between. It's not really a main focus. Like, she doesn't even get like a full road trip with Zuko episode, you know what I mean?
I'm going with Zuko. What? Everyone else went on a life-changing field trip with Zuko. Now it's my turn.
While Aang, Katara, and Zuko are the 3 most important characters in the show, who is allowed to do what is very skewed. Like, Aang's journey of accepting being the Avatar lasts throughout the entire series. Zuko's arc lasts the entire series. Acknowledging that is not dismissing Katara. It is simply acknowledging the reality of what she does in the series. And I'm also not power scaling her. There is nothing wrong with her becoming very powerful very quickly. But I will say, if I do have one nitpick about it, it does make bending feel like something that can be mastered in like a 6-month intensive camp and not like a lifelong discipline. And a lot of this got exacerbated by The Legend of Korra and the comics, because it felt like Katara got relegated to just being Aang's widow. Like, she's alive and absent for so many moments, and meanwhile Zuko and even Toph get to be part of the action, and if they do, why not Katara? And there are so many excuses as to why, and it's just kind of like, but it's still just annoying. And it kind of reminds me of like Padme from Star Wars. And like, my hot take has always been that Padme is one of the most emotionally complex female characters in Star Wars. But because she's doomed to die by canon, a lot of her like political ambition, drive, and heart is just largely ignored. Also because, you know, Natalie Portman had tapped out. And even in the sequel series and spin-offs, when people talk about like Luke and Leia's legacy, Padme is hardly ever brought up in a serious way. And it's like, it's not because Padme is a bad female character, but because like at a certain point she kind of serves one singular purpose.
So this is how liberty dies, with thunderous applause.
Korra was created to be Aang's foil, as multiple interviews have explained, and Bryke have mentioned being surprised at how little grace audiences gave Korra to make mistakes. If I was surprised at anything, it may have been that it seemed like people were less willing to let her make mistakes than they were with Aang. But I didn't worry about that stuff too much. I am always more concerned with the cumulative impact of a character's arc. People really underestimate how much grace male characters are given. Like, for example, to go back to a previous video, you take Mark from Invincible. If a female character took as many bombastic fails as Mark, or like chose their romantic partner over like the world the way Mark does, they would be torn apart. Like, do people critique Mark? Yes, but they also give him the grace of being a teenager. Like, if Korra didn't go into battle because her girlfriend broke her leg, they would say that she was like even more of a flop than they do right now. So like, do I think Korra is criticized just for being a girl? No, I don't think the writing is very strong at times for her. I think that they were so focused on making her a foil to Aang, they didn't know how to actually make her like lead her own show. I think it's also important to admit that Korra is a more gender subversive character than like Katara or Toph, and is the main character. And as the series evolved with Korra, her development was mainly done by like having her get her ass kicked so she could grow from that like she was a goddamn Super Saiyan. But that's also kind of a problem because it felt like, to me, a lack of taking time to understand like what Korra's spiritual conflict was gonna be.
It's only been 2 weeks. You need time to heal.
Aang has the better show, characters, and villain to best illustrate who he is. Plus, being a young boy character who is reluctant to be the chosen one is a story that just cooks. People love the reluctant hero so much. I don't, but people do. And as much as people say that they want brash, complex female characters, when they get them, they don't know what to do with them. Korra is imperfect on an imperfect show that is still better than most shows. The problem is that she's being compared directly to a much better show in terms of structure, character development, and political identity, even though I think it's messy in all the accounts. And it was also just a different era of television. In 2005, like the first ever YouTube video was uploaded. 2012, you know, Obama was president. Coney 2012 happened. J.K. Rowling hadn't lost her fucking mind yet. The current BLM movement started in 2013 because of the acquittal of George Zimmerman for the shooting death murder of Trayvon Martin, which was happening at the time this show was happening, and people were having these conversations about what does it mean to have representation on television. Korra eventually had to meet more moments than Aang did as a protagonist, and so it makes it harder for her to be the Avatar, because what does it mean to be the Avatar in, like, you know, a more honestly modernized place, a more complicated place, and not necessarily having, in my opinion, a writer's room that knew how to handle all of those intersecting identities in a way that would reach the broadest audience. It's always hard for me to talk about Avatar: The Last Airbender unless it's about, you know, my passion, my brain rot, my Zutara, because this I know. But when it comes to talking about The Legend of Korra, I always have a lot of mixed feelings because I know Korra fans go through it, and I also understand like the criticism of it. I think it's a very complicated issue. I think it's made more complicated by the fact that like there is race issues, there is gender, there's intersection. There's also a fan base that is very tribal and passionate and a little bit I think the word
tempestuous? Heinous bitch is the term used most often.
Obviously, I'm part of it. I've been a part of the Avatar fandom since like I was 14 years old. I just turned 33 at the time of recording, like a couple of days ago. The problem with Korra is not that she's inherently a bad character or that I think Break are bad writers. But I do think that there are different expectations for characters who lead spin-offs. There are different expectations for female characters. And I think that there is a pedestal that Avatar: The Last Airbender was allowed to have, that as it keeps getting redone in these terrible live action adaptations, as it keeps being like put onto streaming services, people pick at it more and more and more. And so the things about it that were really revolutionary and compelling then, some of it still remains and I think is still valuable, as all TV shows that, you know, age can be. But I think people are now, with Korra being more recent, and now this new series, they're asking different kinds of questions. It's been interesting to see the lack of good adaptationness of this series across mediums. I think ultimately, Avatar: The Last Airbender, that first 3 seasons was lightning in a bottle. I don't think it's something that was emulated or easily recaptured. I know there's gonna be disagreement. I'm totally okay with that. This actually isn't close to my heart, or like, there's actually good things to debate. I don't have to argue with people 17 times about the fact that, you know, Amber in Invincible was white in the comics, because, you know, I'm aware. I can read. Don't worry, my beautiful brain rot babies. I'll get to you guys soon. We know what a government trying to keep information and propagandize its citizens looks like.
Firelord Sozin battled the Air Nation Army. Kuzan?
Is that a trick question? The Air Nomads didn't have a formal military. Sozin defeated them by ambush.
Trump is right now targeting divisive narratives in libraries. Keeping up with this kind of information can be difficult, but I use Ground News, the sponsor of this video, to follow along. There is a reason you've seen everyone, and I know, everyone, talk about Ground News. Not only can you keep up with what's going on in the world, but more importantly, you can see how it's being reported. On Ground News, each story comes with a visual breakdown of the political bias, factuality, and ownership. It also makes it easier at a glance to see how certain words and phrases are used to frame a narrative. For example, with this story, it has 496 total sources, with 79 leaning left, 59 leaning right, and 210 that are in the center. You can see an article by the right-wing site The Federalist, which calls American libraries militantly political and claims America's librarians elected a Marxist to represent them and stake their reputation on providing explicitly sexual material to kids. This, of course, is bullshit, but it is important to understand what the other side is being fed. Knowing their rhetoric is an important part of combating misinformation. Ground News is so useful that I'm offering 40% off their Vantage subscription. You can only access this discount through my link, click in the video description, and support an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent.